Politics, commentary, entertainment, sports, news, and opinion now. Here is Steve Malzberg.
What are we dealing with in this country right now? Two different philosophies. One philosophy, which was the original one, that this is a country for, of, and by the people, where we encourage, personal freedom, entrepreneurship, innovation. The other one is one where we're for, of, and by the government, where the government creates a, quote, utopia, unquote, where we take care of everybody's needs, but we control their lives as well. This has been tried many times before, this utopian vision. The same thing always happens. You develop a very small elite class, a rapidly shrinking middle class, and a gigantically expanding dependent class.
All right, folks, welcome to the road to the White House. I'm Steve Malzberg, of course, and that was Ben Carson sitting in this studio with me not too long ago, describing his vision for America and of America. And the question is today, will he run, should he run, and what will his chances be? Joining us to talk about this, Republican campaign consultant and advisor Ed Rollins and CEO of InsiderAdvantage, Matt Towery. Hello, gentlemen. Let me put up a poll, if I might. It's a Rasmussen poll, and it shows Hillary Clinton and Ben Carson head-to-head. And it's Hillary 45, Ben Carson 38. And that is, or was, and still is, I guess, the closest, the best performance against Hillary. Rick Perry had 36%, Ted Cruz had 37%. So it's all, almost the same. But Carson did poll the best, according to Rasmussen, against Hillary. Ed, let me ask you, do you think that Ben Carson would make a viable Republican presidential candidate?
I think Dr. Carson is an extraordinary man, and I'm glad we have him out there talking about big issues. I think when you get into presidential politics and you get into presidential politics in a crowded field like we are, it's going to be very, very difficult for him to be able to raise the money or the resources. There's a great quote in the book Blood Feud, and it's from Richard Neustadt, who's one of the great political sciences. And he talks about presidential power from the book Presidency. The presidency is no place for amateurs. Experienced politicians of extraordinary temperament need to be the ones that run. Unless you have acquired that new experience in political office, presidency is for men of politics. It's not for every politician. My sense today is we've just tried this experiment. We had a very effective campaigner and a terrible president. And that doesn't mean that Dr. Carson should be tagged by that. But his experience, obviously, has been in a very particular area. It's medicine. He's been an extraordinary surgeon, was a brilliant, brilliant surgeon. He has a very powerful message. But in the candidacy and in dealing with trying to get elected and to win primaries and caucuses and raising $1 billion or more, which is what it'll take to beat Hillary Clinton, is a long, hard road, and I just don't think he can do it.
Matt, where do you stand on the doctor getting into the race?
Well, I sort of agree with Ed. It's very intriguing, and obviously what he has to say is yes, can you hear me?
Ed, let's put up on the screen. You mentioned money, Ed, until we get Matt.
They can't hear me.
Matt, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi, Matt. Okay, so I'm sorry for the technical difficulty. Yeah, have you now. So do you agree with Ed, sir?
Great. I do agree with Ed. I quite frankly, let's look at it this way. Several decades ago, I was in a state House of Representatives, then went on to other things. Barack Obama served in the legislature and in just a few years in the U.S. Senate went on to the presidency. But in being in politics, even just those few years in the Senate, he was knocked around enough to be ready to run for president. The Republican Party, and Ed knows this, can tell better than anyone, just doesn't have a history of giving the nomination to many folks who have not either been a U.S. Senator, a congressman, a governor, or a general in a major war, such as Dwight Eisenhower. It's just really tough business out there. I like what he has to say. It's very compelling, but it'd be very difficult to see him making it through the primaries.
Yeah, let's put up on the screen. We have compiled a list of what some of the obstacles, in addition to what Ed brought up, his money, and what you've just alluded to. Some of them are on that list, and we're talking about money. I guess that's first and foremost. But female and minority votes. Let's go with that. I mean, Ben Carson, and I love him. I think he's great, and I love talking to him, and I think he resonates with a great percentage of the population. But having said that, he also makes news by what he says, and that's not always good for a presidential candidate. For instance, he likened abortion in America to human sacrifice of paganism, and Obamacare is worse than slavery. So let me ask you, Matt, if he were to throw his hat into the ring, if he were to become the candidate, let's say, how would blacks and women react to him?
Well, there's always a fascination on the Republican side with running an African American, or so there'll be a lot of novelty. That was the case with Herman Cain. The problem is when you get into a general election, worry to make it. You get into a general election, worry to make it to that point. It's a very difficult road trying to move African American voters away from the Democratic Party. And as far as women go, they're the critical swing vote. We see it in poll after poll nationwide. And we're seeing women, when the economy gets better, women tend to drift a bit more, independent women tend to be more to the center of the dial. And so issues like abortion become more important. We're starting to begin to see that again. I think he'd have some trouble in a national election were he a nominee. Don't want to discount him. Anything can happen. And Lord knows I predicted for 30 years the wrong person at the wrong time. So it's probably the best news Ben Carson could have. But I just think it would be very tough.
Ed, women, minorities?
I think the critical thing here is, as I said earlier, I think he's an extraordinary human being. I think it's important to have his voice in the game. But presidential politics are very, very tough. And it's not like we have a void of candidates this time. We've got very serious candidates. We're going to have 5 or 6 governors, big states and smaller states. We're going to have a couple of senators who are going to run Tea Party and establishment. And my sense is that our party is not going to turn to someone that they don't know and doesn't have a familiarity with, no matter how powerful his message is. I watched Ronald Reagan. I started with Ronald Reagan many, many years ago. I saw him the first couple of years where he struggled after being a great communicator and a great leader of the conservative movement. The first couple of years he was governor. He learned and became extremely accomplished by the time he became president. Had a very clear goal of what he wanted to do, but he had learned primaries and caucuses beginning in Iowa and New Hampshire and South Carolina is as rough and tough as any game there is. Is as rough and tough as any game there is. And I've been around 9 presidential campaigns. So my sense is that there may be a novelty to him. He certainly is an articulate man, but he has such a limited background when it comes to actual politics that I think to a certain extent the things he will say, whoever the Republican nominee is going to be pro-life. So he may get extreme by some of the things he says beyond being just pro-life, and I don't think that necessarily helps him. Equally as important, most African Americans who overwhelmingly supported this president, overwhelmingly support Democrats, have a tendency not to basically be attracted to Republican candidates and have a tendency to somewhat turn more fiercely against conservatives, as we've watched Ken Blackwell and others in the past. So my sense is it's just a long, hard road. It'll be interesting to see if he does run. I think it'd be much better if he got appointed, we win the presidency, he becomes the Health and Human Services Surgeon General, something like that, where he has expertise and very legitimate.
Well, that was going to be my next question, actually, Ed, and thanks for addressing it. Let me go to Matt for that. I was going to say, what role can he play, or do you think he would be beneficial to the Republican Party if he did play in the presidential race for 2016, or if a Republican were to win the White House, would he be in the cabinet? Matt?
Well, to Ed's point, he probably would be well served to take this time period. He actually gave an interview just a few days ago to an entity and said, basically, why would anyone want to be president of the United States? Look how they look after 2 years. So I'm not sure he has the fire in the belly that really is needed to run in the first place. But if he really wants to get his message across, he can play a role as a surrogate in this next campaign and very easily become a major national surrogate in the presidential campaign once we have a nominee. And then he could be lifted on to the possibility of some role in the cabinet, something related obviously to health and human services or whatever, where he has an expertise. I could see that easily.
Ed, do you think at this point, because he's told me that even it's up to God, and even if God, tells him, not tells him, he's not going to speak to him. He didn't want to imply that he's, crazy or anything. But if God decides that he should run, and therefore, makes him want to run, even then he wouldn't want to be president. And I thought that was very strange. Do you think he's sincere Do you think it's more about selling books and increasing the brand appeal at this point?
I take him at his word. I think he's a very serious man who obviously had an extraordinary career at Johns Hopkins. There's several candidates in this race that God's going to talk to. Mike Huckabee,
right.
Rick Perry, others who basically have made exactly the same kind of statement. I'll see what God counsels me on. God may have many candidates, or God may basically be dealing with other things around the world. I think he's a sincere man. I think he's naive about politics. I think he's obviously out with a bestseller book right now. He's got a voice that's an important voice to be heard in the country. But I think as a presidential candidate, I think at the end of the day, he won't enhance his reputation. He probably tarnishes it somewhat.
All right, gentlemen, I really appreciate you weighing in. Ed Rollins, who, of course, ran the Huckabee campaign, and the CEO of InsiderAdvantage, Matt Towery. Thank you both for being present on the premiere edition of The Road to the White House. Thank you. All right, folks, tomorrow, same time, same place, we take a look at another potential Republican presidential candidate on the road to the White House. Don't miss it. Give Me 5 is next.